The girl said, "I can hear them under the floor," and the lunch lady put down her ladle. Not because the words were alarming. Children at the Verath outpost commissary said strange things all the time: the altitude, the thin air, the boredom of a settlement built on a basalt plateau 300 miles from anything resembling a proper city. Children invented sounds. Children invented friends. Children invented entire civilizations in the cracks between the floor tiles, and the lunch staff learned to nod and keep serving. But Sora did not invent things. In 3 months of midday meals, the 12-year-old had never once spoken a word beyond please and thank you, and occasionally the quiet no beans that she murmured while staring at her tray with the fixed attention of someone willing the food to become invisible. She was Verath born, one of the settlement's handful of draconic children, not a full-blood, not one of the sleek-scaled young who studied in the upper academies, but a half-blood with a human mother long dead and a father whose name no one in the commissary had ever heard spoken aloud. Her scales were sparse, a thin tracing along her jawline, a patch at each temple, a faint iridescence at the backs of her hands that caught the overhead fluorescence and threw them back as something almost beautiful if you looked at the right angle, which most people did not. Her wings were vestigial, narrow folds of membrane pressed flat against her shoulder blades beneath the oversized jacket she wore in every season, even the summer months when the commissary's ventilation struggled, and the rest of the children stripped to their undershirts. She kept her head down. She kept her tray close. She moved through the lunch line with the practiced economy of someone who had learned that occupying the least possible space was a survival skill. Marit Tull had worked the commissary at Verath outpost for 9 years. She was 53, wide across the shoulders from decades of lifting stock pots and stacking supply crates, with hands that could peel 40 pounds of root vegetables in an hour, and a face that had settled into the particular expression of women who have seen everything twice and are no longer impressed by any of it. She ran the kitchen the way she had run it since her assignment, efficiently, without complaint, with the quiet understanding that feeding people was not glamorous work, but it was necessary work, and that the lunch line at Verath outpost was, for some of the children who passed through it, the only reliable meal of the day. She had noticed Sora the way you notice a crack in a wall gradually, then all at once. The girl was always last in line, always alone, always wearing the jacket. The other children gave her a berth that was not wide enough to be called exclusion and not narrow enough to be called inclusion, a calibrated distance that said we know what you are and we have decided it does not interest us. Marit had seen it before in other children at other postings, the geometry of indifference. But now Sora was standing at the counter with her empty tray and her eyes were wide, and she had said the first unprompted sentence Marit had ever heard from her, and the sentence was, "I can hear them under the floor." "Hear what, sweetheart?" Sora's hands tightened on the tray. The iridescent scales at the backs of her knuckles flared, a reflex Marit had learned from the settlement's posted guidelines that draconic children could not fully control, linked to autonomic arousal. Fear, excitement, distress. The guidelines did not specify which. Humming, Sora said, "Low, under the tiles. It's been there for a week, but today it's louder." Marit looked at the floor. Standard commissary tile, beige, scuffed, unremarkable. Beneath it, the building's utility crawlspace, then the basalt shelf that the entire outpost sat on. Nothing to hum, nothing to hear. "Could be the pipes," Marit said. "The hot water recirculator makes a noise when the pressure drops. I'll put in a maintenance request." Sora shook her head. The motion was small but certain. "It's not pipes. It's—" She stopped. Her jaw worked, and Marit could see the girl searching for words that would sound reasonable, words that would not earn her the look she clearly expected, the look that said, "You are making things up and I do not have time for this. It sounds like names." Marit put the ladle in its cradle. She wiped her hands on her apron, a gesture of transition, the shift from working to listening, and leaned her forearms on the counter. Names, she said, not a question, not a challenge, just the word offered back held open. I know it sounds, I know. Sora's voice dropped to barely audible. Forget it, I'm sorry. I didn't say forget it, I said names. Tell me about the names. The commissary was emptying. The other children had cleared their trays and filed out, the lunch period ending, the afternoon shift beginning. In 5 minutes the kitchen staff would start the breakdown, scraping, stacking, mopping, the efficient disassembly of a meal that had fed 212 people in 45 minutes. Merritt's crew, Das and Fayan, both enlisted, both competent, were already stacking the warming trays. Sora stood at the counter and told her. It had started 6 days ago. A vibration, subvocal, felt more than heard, the kind of sound that lived in the bones rather than the ears. Sora felt it in her jaw first. The thin scales there acted as conductors, she explained, transmitting frequencies that human tissue filtered out. Then in her temples. Then in her hands, a tingling in the iridescent patches that woke her at night and would not stop until she pressed her palms flat against the floor and listened. The humming was not random. It had patterns, long tones, short tones, intervals of silence that felt deliberate. And inside the patterns, layered beneath the primary vibration like a whisper beneath a conversation, were sounds that Sora's mind translated as names. Not words she recognized, not any language she had been taught, but names, she was certain of this, because they carried the particular weight that names carry, the sense of a thing being called into existence by the act of being spoken. They're underneath, she said, deep, maybe really deep, and they're calling for something. Or someone. Merritt listened to all of it without interrupting. When Sora finished, the girl's shoulders were hunched, her chin dropped, her body already curling into the posture of someone bracing for dismissal. All right, Merritt said. After I finish the breakdown, you show me where it's loudest. Sora looked up. The expression on her face was not gratitude. It was something closer to shock, the disorientation of someone who had expected a closed door and found it open. You believe me. I believe you hear something. That's enough to start. The commissary kitchen, stripped down after service, was a utilitarian space. Steel counters, commercial ovens, a walk-in cooler that hummed at a frequency Merritt had stopped hearing years ago, a floor drain in the center of the room covered by a grate. The overhead lights were fluorescent, flat, unwavering. There was nothing romantic about it. It was a place where food was prepared and served and cleaned up after, and it smelled, at this hour, of dish soap and the faint mineral tang of the water recirculator. Sora walked the kitchen slowly, her boots silent on the tile, her head tilted at an angle that exposed the jaw scales to the air. She moved like someone following a signal, pausing, adjusting, moving again, and Merritt, watching from the doorway, was struck by how different the girl looked when she was not trying to disappear. Her spine was straight. Her chin was lifted. The vestigial wings beneath the jacket shifted as she turned, small adjustments of balance and orientation, and for the first time Merritt could see the architecture of them. Not useless folds, but structures, membraned and veined, pressed flat by choice rather than incapacity. Sora stopped at the back corner of the kitchen, near the dry storage shelves where the bulk flour and the canned goods were stacked. She crouched, pressed both palms flat against the tile and closed her eyes. Here, she said, right here. It's loudest here. Merritt crossed the kitchen and crouched beside her. She put her own hand on the tile, cold, inert. She felt nothing, no vibration, no hum, no names. But she was human and the guidelines were clear. Draconic auditory range extended 2 full octaves below the human threshold, and draconic hybrid children retained significant portions of that range. I can't hear it, Merritt said, but I want to see what's under this floor. She pulled the dry storage shelves away from the wall. 9 years of commissary work had made her strong enough to do it alone, though Sora helped, her thin arms surprisingly effective when she braced and pulled with her whole body. Behind the shelves in the wall's baseboard was an access panel, a standard maintenance hatch, 30 inches square, secured with 4 hex bolts that had not been turned in what looked like years. Rust had begun to bloom around the bolt heads. Merritt retrieved a socket wrench from the kitchen's maintenance kit. Every commissary kept one, because commercial ovens broke down with the regularity of weather and worked the bolts free. The last one snapped rather than turned, the shaft shearing from corrosion, and the panel swung inward on stiff hinges to reveal the utility crawlspace beneath the building. Air came up from the opening, cool, dry, carrying a mineral scent that was sharper than the kitchen's usual smell, basalt dust, Merritt thought, mixed with something else, something faintly warm like stone that had been sitting in sunlight, though there was no sunlight beneath this floor. Sora leaned toward the opening. Her jaw scales flared. The iridescent patches on her hands pulsed, actually pulsed, a visible brightening that traveled from wrist to fingertip and back, and the girl's breath caught. "It's louder," she whispered, "much louder. They know I'm here." Merritt looked at the 12-year-old girl crouched at the edge of a dark hole in the floor of her kitchen, and made a decision that came from the same place all her important decisions came from. Not from thought, but from the kind of certainty that lives in the hands. "I'm going to get a light," she said. "You're going to stay right here. Nobody goes down there alone." She came back with 2 flashlights from the emergency kit, a first aid bag slung over her shoulder, because habit is habit, and Merritt Tull did not enter unknown spaces without something to patch what went wrong, and a 20-foot coil of utility rope tied to the oven's anchor bolt. They went down together. The crawlspace was standard for the first 12 feet, concrete floor, utility pipes, junction boxes, the building's structural supports marching in rows like the ribs of a sleeping animal. Merritt's flashlight swept the space in practiced arcs. Nothing unusual, nothing alive. Then the concrete ended. The floor transitioned, without seam or joint, from poured gray concrete to raw basalt, not rough quarry stone but polished, smooth, dark as obsidian and warm to the touch. Merritt pressed her palm against it and felt heat, a gentle radiance that came from deep within the rock, steady and even. The warmth traveled up through her wrist and into her forearm, and she pulled her hand back with the sharp reflex of someone who has touched a living thing when she expected stone. Sora's scales were bright now. Every iridescent patch on her body, jaw, temples, hands, and others Merritt could see for the first time, running down the girl's forearms where she had pushed up her sleeves, was emitting a soft, pearlescent glow, as if the light were coming from beneath the scales rather than reflecting off their surface. The girl's face had changed. The tension was gone. The habitual caution was gone. She looked, Merritt thought with a start, like someone arriving home. "This way," Sora said, and her voice had changed. Not louder, deeper. A resonance in her chest that Merritt could feel through the basalt floor, the same subvocal vibration that had sent the girl to her counter with wide eyes and a tray she'd forgotten to fill. The basalt passage descended. The angle was gentle, a ramp, not stairs, and the walls on either side were carved. Not roughly, not with human tools. The carvings were fluid, organic, depicting shapes that Merritt's flashlight revealed in fragments as they walked. Winged forms in flight, coiled bodies at rest, great eyes rendered with a precision that made them seem to follow the light. Dragons. Hundreds of them, carved into the living rock with a skill that predated the outpost, predated the settlement, predated, Merritt was suddenly certain, anything humans had built on this plateau. Sora was not using her flashlight. She was walking by the light of her own scales, and the glow was enough to illuminate 3 feet in every direction, a soft luminescence that turned the carved walls into something alive, the dragons in the stone seeming to shift and breathe in the moving light. They descended for perhaps 80 feet. The air grew warmer. The mineral scent intensified, joined now by something else, an animal warmth, a living heat, the smell of a body much larger than the space it occupied. And the humming, which Merritt still could not hear, was now something she could feel, A pressure in her sinuses, a buzz in her back teeth, a gentle trembling in the flashlight's casing. The passage opened into a chamber. Merritt stopped walking. She stood at the threshold, and the flashlight beams scattered across a space that should not have existed beneath a commissary kitchen. The chamber was vast, 50 feet across, roughly circular, with a domed ceiling that rose 30 feet above their heads. The walls were carved from floor to ceiling with the same fluid dragon forms, and the basalt here was not dark but luminous, veined with threads of amber mineral that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light, like a heartbeat made visible. The warmth was substantial now, a radiant heat that came from the walls and the floor and the air itself, as if the stone were breathing. And in the center of the chamber, arranged in a precise circle on a raised platform of polished basalt, were eggs. 12 of them. Each one the size of a watermelon, their shells a deep, translucent green bronze that caught the amber light and threw it back as refracted gold. The shells were not opaque. Merritt could see, through the mineral-rich surface, the shadows of shapes inside, curled forms, folded wings, the suggestion of tails wrapped around bodies not yet ready to unfurl. They were warm, they were alive, and they were humming. The sound was audible now, just barely, pulled up from subvocal range by the sheer combined output of 12 living things calling in unison. It was not a mechanical hum. It was voices, young voices. The sound of 12 creatures who had been waiting in the dark, calling for someone who could hear them and who had finally been answered. Sora walked toward them as if pulled by a current. She crossed the chamber floor with a certainty that Merritt had never seen in her. No hesitation, no hunched shoulders, no practiced invisibility. She walked the way someone walks into a room they have always belonged in, and when she reached the platform she knelt beside the nearest egg and placed both hands on its shell. The effect was immediate. The egg's hum shifted, rose in pitch, took on harmonics, became something complex and layered, and the glow beneath Sora's scales intensified until the girl was luminous, her jaw scales bright as opals, her hand patches blazing with a pale gold light that matched the amber veins in the walls. The other 11 eggs responded. Their hums aligned, finding Sora's frequency, locking into it, and the chamber filled with a sound that Merritt could now hear. Not the subvocal vibration that had been below her range, but a higher resonance, pulled up by the combined output of 12 eggs responding to a half-blood girl who had heard them through a commissary floor. It sounded like a choir. It sounded like a name being spoken by 12 voices at once. It sounded like welcome. Sora was crying, not the guarded, silent tears of a child who has learned to cry without being noticed. These were open tears, running down her cheeks and over the jaw scales, and her face was not grief, but something Merritt had no word for, a compound emotion that contained relief and recognition, and a joy so large it could not be held without breaking. "They know me," Sora said. "They've been calling me. They've been calling me since I was born, and I couldn't." She pressed her forehead against the egg. "I thought I was broken. I thought the sounds were wrong. I thought hearing things that nobody else heard meant something was wrong with me." Merritt set down her flashlight. She crossed the chamber, her boots quiet on the warm basalt, and she knelt beside Sora. She did not touch the eggs. She put her hand on the girl's shoulder, the one where the vestigial wing pressed against the jacket, a ridge of bone and membrane that Sora had spent her whole short life hiding, and she held it there. "You are not broken," she said. "You were listening." Sora leaned into the touch. The eggs hummed. The chamber glowed. And Merritt Tull, lunch lady, 53 years old, kneeling in a chamber older than any human structure on the plateau, understood something that her 9 years of ladling soup and stacking trays had not prepared her for. That kindness does not require comprehension. You do not need to understand the song to know when a child needs someone to listen. They stayed in the chamber for 2 hours that first time. Sora moved from egg to egg, touching each one, her face intense with a concentration that Merritt recognized from medics, from mechanics, from anyone whose hands were trained to read what their eyes could not. The girl was learning the eggs, reading their frequencies, their temperatures, the subtle differences in their shells that told her things Marit could not access. Twice Sora frowned and adjusted an egg's position on the platform, tilting it a few degrees, shifting it closer to the amber veins in the stone, and each time the egg's hum strengthened, a change subtle enough that only Sora's scales registered it. "This one is cold," Sora said, her hands on the seventh egg. "Colder than the others. The vein beneath it has gone dim." Marit looked. She could see it, the amber thread in the basalt directly below the seventh egg was darker than its neighbors, its pulse slower, irregular. She did not know what it meant. Sora clearly did. The girl's jaw had tightened, her scales flaring with a brightness that was closer to alarm than wonder. "I need warm water," the girl said, "and cloth, clean cloth not treated with anything," and she hesitated. "Can I have one of the heating pads from the first aid kit?" "It's a chemical heat pad. Single use, lasts about 6 hours. "That's enough, I think. I don't know, I've never," Sora's voice caught. "I don't actually know what I'm doing, I just know what they need." "That's enough to start," Marit said, and realized she was repeating herself and that the repetition was the point. The same answer, given as many times as it needed to be given, until the girl believed it. Marit climbed back up to the kitchen. She filled a stock pot with warm water, body temperature, her wrist as a gauge, and gathered clean dish towels, the chemical heat pad, and after a moment's thought, the thermal blanket from the emergency kit. She carried it all down in 2 trips, the rope steady against the passage wall, the carved dragons watching her with their stone eyes as she passed. Sora wrapped the cold egg in warm, damp cloth with hands that trembled at first and then steadied. She activated the heat pad and positioned it beneath the egg, adjusting and readjusting until she was satisfied with the angle. She covered the arrangement with the thermal blanket, tucking the edges with the precision of someone making a bed for a patient who cannot tell you where it hurts. Within 20 minutes, the amber vein beneath the 7th egg brightened. Its pulse quickened to match the others. Sora pressed her ear to the shell and listened, her eyes closed, her scales glowing, and when she lifted her head the tears were gone, and in their place was an expression that Marit recognized from a lifetime of feeding people who were hungry: satisfaction. The specific, earned satisfaction of having met a need. "It's warming," Sora said. "The heartbeat is stronger." "Good, now I need you to eat something. You skipped lunch." Sora blinked. The mundanity of the statement, the absolute, practical ordinariness of it, delivered in a chamber full of glowing dragon eggs by a woman in a stained apron, cracked something open in the girl's face, and she almost laughed. Not quite. A breath that was shaped like laughter, a softening of the jaw that was not a smile but was adjacent to one. "I left my tray upstairs." "I'll make you a plate. The eggs aren't going anywhere." They climbed back to the kitchen. Marit made Sora a plate, not the standard commissary serving but a proper meal, the kind she made for herself on quiet evenings. Grilled fish from the morning's delivery, roasted root vegetables, a slab of bread with butter, a cup of the herbal tea that she kept in her personal cupboard, because the commissary's standard offering tasted like boiled paper. Sora ate at the steel counter, while Marit finished the breakdown she had abandoned 2 hours ago, and the silence between them was not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say, but the silence of 2 people who had found something together and were still learning its shape. The next morning, the first complication arrived in the form of Das, Marit's senior kitchen assistant, who had noticed the displaced dry storage shelves and the open access panel, and the fact that his supervisor had vanished for 2 hours during the afternoon breakdown. "Marit, what's behind the wall?" "Infrastructure." "Infrastructure that takes 2 hours and involves a 12-year-old half-blood." Marit looked at him over the top of the stock pot she was scrubbing. Das was a good worker, reliable, incurious by nature, and she had never needed to manage him beyond the morning briefing and the occasional reminder about the expiration dates on the dairy. He did not deserve to be lied to, and she did not have the energy for it. There's something under the building, something old, something alive. The girl can hear it, and I'm helping her look after it until the proper authorities get here. Das stared at her. I need you to keep the breakdown on schedule while I'm down there. Can you do that? Marit, is this? Can you do that, Das? He could. He did. He also, to his credit, did not ask again, though Marit caught him looking at the access panel with the expression of a man who has decided that his supervisor's business is her own, and that curiosity has a price he is not willing to pay. The second complication arrived on day 3. A maintenance crew dispatched by the settlement's facilities manager, who had received Marit's original work order about the humming pipes and had sent 2 technicians with acoustic sensors to diagnose the recirculator. The technicians stood in the kitchen, ran their equipment, found nothing wrong with the pipes, and then one of them noticed the open access panel and the rope still tied to the oven's anchor bolt. Ma'am, has someone been in the crawlspace? That panel is supposed to stay sealed. There are structural considerations. I opened it to check for the source of the vibration, Marit said, which was true. And I found it. The vibration is geological, not mechanical. I've reported it to the settlement administrator. The technician frowned, made a note on his tablet, and left. Marit stood at the counter for a full minute afterward, breathing slowly, understanding for the first time that what lay beneath her kitchen was not just a discovery but a responsibility, and that responsibility had a weight she was going to have to carry in addition to everything else, because the alternative, stepping back, closing the panel, telling Sora that the proper people would handle it, was not something she was capable of doing. Not anymore, not after seeing the girl's face in the amber light. How long have they been down there? Sora asked that evening between bites of fish. I don't know. The outpost is 40 years old, but those carvings are older. A lot older. Someone put them there. Someone arranged them on that platform. They're not wild eggs, they're placed, protected. The chamber is designed for them. Marit considered this. Then someone was keeping them, and something happened to the keeper. Or the keeper left, or the keeper couldn't hear them anymore. Sora set down her fork. Her face had gone serious in a way that was older than 12. Someone has to tell the Draconic Council. There are 12 eggs in a chamber beneath this building, and they're alive and they need care, and I'm the only person who can hear them. You're 12. I know. And you're telling me that 12 unregistered dragon eggs are incubating in an ancient chamber beneath my kitchen floor. Yes. Marit dried her hands on her apron. She looked at the girl, thin, serious, 12. A half-blood who had spent 3 months moving through the lunch line like a ghost, who had iridescent scales she covered with a jacket and vestigial wings she pressed flat against her back, and a gift she had mistaken for a defect because no one had ever told her otherwise. Then here's what we do, Marit said. We report it, properly. I know the settlement administrator, she owes me a favor from the water recycler incident 3 years ago. We get the draconic liaison involved. We get an expert down there who can tell us what those eggs need. And until that happens, you come to my kitchen every day after service and we go down together. Nobody goes alone. Nobody skips meals. And you tell me everything you hear, and I write it down, because someone needs to keep a record, and that someone is going to be me. Sora stared at her. Why are you helping me? Marit thought about the question. It deserved a real answer, not the brisk reassurance she used on children who needed a second serving. Because 3 months ago a girl walked into my lunch line and I could see she was hungry and alone, and I did what I always do, which is fill the plate and keep my mouth shut. And that was fine when it was just lunch. But you came to me today with something important, something you were frightened of, and you trusted me with it. And I'm not going to be the person who says that's nice dear and sends you back to being invisible. I'm a lunch lady, Sora. I feed people. Sometimes that means food, sometimes it means something else. The silence after was the longest 5 seconds of Merritt's life. Then Sora nodded, and the nod was small, and the trust in it was enormous. They went down together every day after that. Merritt filed the report. The settlement administrator, a practical woman named Cortez who had spent 20 years managing outpost logistics and was not easily rattled, went quiet for 10 seconds when Merritt described the chamber, then picked up the comm and made 3 calls in succession. One to the draconic liaison at Verath North, one to the regional council's records office, and one to a direct line that she did not explain and that Merritt did not ask about. "They'll send someone," Cortez said. "It may take a week. The southern stations aren't a priority. The eggs are a priority. I understand that, but the people who need to hear this are in the northern range, and the channels are what they are." Merritt nodded. She knew how channels worked. She had spent 9 years filing maintenance requests that took 3 weeks to generate a response. Bureaucracy was the same everywhere. It moved at the speed of comfort, and nothing beneath a commissary floor was going to change that. So in the gap between discovery and response, there was work to be done, and Merritt and Sora did it. Sora monitored the eggs each afternoon. She had developed in the space of days a routine that was part intuition and part methodology, checking each egg by touch and by sound, recording the temperature differential between them, noting changes in the amber vein's luminosity, adjusting positions when a frequency shifted or a pulse faltered. She kept a notebook. Merritt had given her one from the kitchen supply cabinet, the kind used for inventory logs, and her entries, which Merritt read each evening after the girl had gone to bed, were precise, observational, and occasionally startling in their quiet authority. Egg 3, humming lower than yesterday. Shell temperature up 0.5 degrees, estimated by palm comparison. Repositioned 10 degrees clockwise toward the stronger vein junction. Humming normalized within 4 minutes. Heartbeat steady. Egg 7, the cold one, stabilized. Heat pad replaced with a fresh one at 14:30. Shell glow has returned, faint green, visible only when I press my cheek to it. The occupant is moving. I can feel it shift when I hum back. Egg 11, new. A harmonic I haven't heard before, higher, faster, almost excited. I think it's close to hatching, told Merritt. She said we'll deal with it when it happens. I think she's worried. I'm not. Merritt was worried. She was a lunch lady in charge of a kitchen that fed 200 people, and she was now also, by default and temperament, the guardian of a 12-year-old girl who was becoming a dragon keeper in a chamber beneath her floor. The responsibility sat on her shoulders with the familiar weight of stock pots and supply crates, heavy but manageable, because Merritt Tull had spent 53 years learning that the difference between can't and won't was usually just a matter of deciding. She brought supplies down each day. Warm water, fresh cloth, chemical heat pads when they were available, the thermal blanket for the eggs on the chamber's cooler side. She carried a camping lantern because the chamber's amber glow, while beautiful, was not sufficient for human eyes to work by. She brought food, always food, because Sora forgot to eat when she was with the eggs, and Merritt had raised 2 sons and knew that a child in the grip of purpose will starve without noticing. "Eat," she said, setting a covered plate on the basalt floor beside Sora. "The fish is getting cold." "In a minute, Egg 4 is doing something." "Egg 4 can wait, eat." Sora ate. The eggs hummed. And Merritt sat on the warm stone and watched the girl work and thought about the layers of a life, the visible surface where you ladle soup and mop floors and file maintenance requests, and the hidden strata beneath, where ancient things wait in the dark for someone with the right ears to find them. On the 3rd day, Egg 3 nearly failed. Sora arrived for the afternoon check and went rigid at the passage entrance, her scales flaring bright with an alarm that Merritt, by now, could read as clearly as a shout. "Something's wrong. Egg 3, the hum is fading, it's pulling away." They ran. Marit had not run in the passage before. The descent was too steep, the basalt too smooth, but she ran now, the camping lantern swinging wild arcs against the carved walls, and reached the chamber 2 steps behind Sora, who was already at the platform with both hands on the egg. The shell was cool. Noticeably, dangerously cool, the green-bronze surface dull where the others still caught the amber light. The vein cluster beneath it has shifted, Sora said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. The basalt contracts when the deep temperature changes. The vein moved and the egg lost contact with the heat source. I need to reposition it, but if I move it wrong, the shock could. Tell me what to do. Hold it, both hands underneath, keep it level. I need to feel for the new vein alignment. Marit held the egg. It was heavier than she expected, dense, warm at its core but cooling at the surface, the shell textured with fine ridges that pressed into her palms. She could feel, very faintly, a vibration inside, not a hum, not a heartbeat, something between, a living thing asking to be warm. Sora pressed her ear to the platform. She shifted, listened, shifted again. There, 2 inches to the left and forward, slowly. Marit moved the egg. 2 inches. Slowly. The amber vein beneath the new position flared and warmth rose through the basalt and into the shell, and the egg's hum returned, faint at first, then strengthening, finding its place in the chamber's cord. Sora exhaled. Her hands were still shaking. Good, Marit said. Good, it's back. If I hadn't been here, if I'd been late. You weren't late, you were here. The girl looked at her, and in that look was the beginning of something that Marit recognized because she had felt it herself, decades ago. The first time she had watched a line of hungry people file past her counter and understood that she was the one standing between them and an empty stomach. The weight of being needed. The specific, irreplaceable weight of knowing that without you, something that matters will fail. We'll check twice a day from now on, Marit said. Morning and afternoon. I'll adjust the kitchen schedule. Sora nodded. The trembling in her hand stopped. The egg hummed. The chamber's amber light pulsed steady and even, and the work continued. On the 4th day after the discovery, Sora found the 13th egg. She was mapping the chamber's acoustics, moving around the platform in a slow spiral with her hands extended, when she stopped at the chamber's far wall. The carved dragons here were larger, older, their detail worn smooth by centuries. Sora pressed both palms against the stone and went very still. There's another one, she said. Behind the wall, deeper in the stone. The frequency is different, older, slower, much slower, like a heartbeat that's been beating for a very, very long time. Marit crossed to her. Can you reach it? No, it's too deep, but it can hear me. Sora's voice was barely a whisper. It's been listening the whole time. The 12 on the platform, they're singing to it. That's what the names are. They're singing its name. The weight of the statement settled into the chamber's warm air. 12 eggs calling a 13th. A song that had been running, unheard, beneath a building full of people eating lunch and filing maintenance requests, and going about the ordinary business of living, for longer than anyone on the surface had been alive. Can it wait, Marit asked, for the experts? It's been waiting for a long time, Sora said. I don't think it minds. I think it just needs to know someone is here. Sora hummed to it each visit after that, a low note that her throat scales amplified into something that vibrated through the stone, through the platform, through the eggs, and into the deep place where the 13th waited. The girl had stopped wearing her jacket. The wings beneath, narrow, membraned, veined with the same iridescent tracery as her hands, were visible now, and when she hummed they shifted, extending just slightly, catching the chamber's amber light. They were not vestigial, Marit realized. They had been dormant. The chamber was waking them. On the 7th day after the discovery, the draconic liaison arrived. She was not what Marit expected. The liaison was tall, lean, with deep amber scales covering her arms from wrist to shoulder, and a pair of folded wings, full-sized, functional, the membranes a rich dark gold rising from her back like furled sails. Her name was Thessaly, and she carried the title of Vein Warden, which Merritt later learned meant she was responsible for the ancient incubation sites scattered across the southern range. Sites that had been lost, buried, forgotten, or deliberately hidden during the centuries-long conflicts that had reduced the dragon population from millions to thousands. Thessaly descended into the chamber and went still. The stillness lasted a full 30 seconds, long enough for the amber veins to pulse twice, long enough for the eggs to register the new presence and adjust their hum, long enough for Merritt, standing in the passage with her lantern, to see the expression on the Vein Warden's face shift from professional composure to something raw. 12, Thessaly said. Her voice was barely controlled. 12 viable eggs in a sealed vein keep beneath a human commissary. 13, Sora said without looking up from egg 11. There's a 13th behind the far wall, deeper in the stone. The frequency is different, older, slower. I found it on day 4. The 12 are singing its name. Thessaly crossed the chamber to the far wall. She knelt and pressed her scaled hand flat against the basalt, and her own scales flared a brighter, deeper glow than Sora's, the gold of old amber. For 10 seconds she was motionless. Then her eyes widened and her hand tightened against the stone. Sovereign class, she said, and her voice had changed. The composure fractured now, replaced by an awe that made her sound for a moment young. That's a sovereign class egg. The harmonic signature is unmistakable. There hasn't been a sovereign hatching in 500 years. She turned to Sora. How long have you been hearing this? Since the first day, but it's deeper, harder to reach. The others are like voices in a room. This one is like a voice at the bottom of a well. I had to listen past the 12 to find it. And you found it. It's been calling. They've all been calling for a long time. Thessaly turned to Merritt. Merritt stood in the passage entrance with her camping lantern and her apron, and the first aid bag she still carried out of habit, and she met the Vein Warden's gaze without flinching. 13 eggs, Thessaly said. 12 standard clutch, 1 sovereign. This is a vein keep, an ancient incubation vault, sealed when the southern colonies fell during the Dimming War. We have records of 17 vein keeps across the range. We thought they were all empty. We thought the eggs were lost. They're not lost, Merritt said. They're under my kitchen. And this girl heard them, through a concrete slab in a commissary floor. This girl has been monitoring them for a week. She has a notebook with daily observations for every egg. She identified the cold one on day 1 and stabilized it with a chemical heat pad and a dish towel. She predicted the hatching timeline for number 11. She found the sovereign egg that your records didn't know about, and she's been humming to it every day since. Thessaly looked at Sora. The girl had not moved from the eggs. Her hands were steady on egg 11, her breathing even, her scales casting their soft glow across the shell and across the face of a child who no longer looked like someone trying to disappear. What is your name? Thessaly asked. Sora. Sora, who taught you to read the frequencies? Nobody, I just hear them, I always have. I thought it was broken. I thought it was something wrong with me because nobody else heard anything and she stopped, drew a breath. I thought the hearing was the defect. Thessaly was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the careful weight of someone delivering a truth that has been needed for a very long time. There is a word in the old language for what you are, Ve-Leth. It means vain listener, a keeper born, not trained, someone whose resonance aligns with the incubation frequencies without teaching, without calibration, without the instruments we have spent centuries building to approximate what your body does naturally. The last known Ve-Leth in the southern range died 200 years ago. We have been without one since. The vein keeps fell silent. The eggs were classified as lost because there was no one left to hear them. Sora's hands tightened on the egg. The light beneath her scales pulsed once, bright and warm, and her wings, the wings she had hidden for her entire life, extended fully for the first time. They were small, narrow, the membranes translucent and traced with gold veins, and they caught the chamber's light and held it. "I'm not trained," she said. "I don't know the proper methods. I've been using dish towels and heat pads and guessing." You stabilized a failing egg with kitchen supplies and intuition. You predicted a hatching window within hours of accuracy. You found a sovereign-class egg hidden behind solid stone, by sound alone. The proper methods exist to approximate what you do naturally. Thessaly's expression was not warmth. It was older than warmth, closer to the recognition that settles into stone. "You have been keeping this chamber alive for a week with a lunch lady and a notebook. The vein wardens will teach you everything we know. But the listening, that is yours. It was always yours." Sora looked at Merritt. The expression on the girl's face was the one from the first day at the lunch counter. The shock of the open door, but deeper now, layered with a week of work and worry, and the earned confidence of someone who had met a need she had not known she could meet. "Merritt comes too," Sora said. Thessaly raised an eyebrow. "The lunch lady." "She's not just a lunch lady. She's the one who believed me, before the chamber, before the eggs, before any of this meant anything. She put down her ladle and she listened." Thessaly looked at Merritt. Merritt looked back. 9 years of kitchen work had given her the ability to meet any gaze without blinking. "I run a kitchen," Merritt said. "I'm not a dragon keeper or a vain listener or a warden. I ladle soup. I stack trays. I mop floors. That's what I do." "And when a child came to you with something she was afraid of," Thessaly said, "you put down the ladle." The silence after was shaped like an answer. On the 9th day, Egg 11 hatched. Sora had predicted it within hours. She had spent the previous evening with both hands on the shell, her eyes closed, her breathing synchronized with the hum inside, and when she finally pulled away, she told Merritt with quiet certainty, "Tomorrow morning early, before the breakfast service." They were in the chamber at 500. The amber veins in the walls were pulsing faster than Merritt had ever seen, a visible acceleration, as if the stone itself knew what was coming. The other 11 eggs had shifted their hum, a collective anticipation, and from deep behind the far wall, the 13th egg's slow pulse had quickened for the first time. Sora knelt beside Egg 11 and placed her hands on the shell and waited. The shell cracked at 527. Not a dramatic break, a thin line, precise, running from crown to base in a spiral that followed the shell's natural grain. Then a second line. A third. The pieces fell away like petals opening, and inside was a hatchling the size of a house cat, its scales a vivid green gold, its wings plastered wet against its body, its eyes gold with vertical pupils blinking in the amber light. It hummed, one note clear and high. And Sora hummed back, the same note transposed to her own register, and the hatchling's head turned toward her voice with the immediate, absolute recognition of a creature, finding the frequency it was born to follow. Sora lifted it from the shell fragments. She held it against her chest, the hatchling's wet scales pressed against her shirt, its small claws gripping the fabric, its head tucked under her chin. Her wings no longer hidden, no longer pressed flat, extended and curved around the hatchling's body, a shelter made of the thing she had spent 12 years being ashamed of. The other 11 eggs hummed in unison. The 13th, deep in the stone, pulsed strong and steady. The chamber's amber veins blazed. The sound rose and filled the space with a warmth that was more than temperature, a resonance that Merritt felt in her chest and her throat and the backs of her eyes, and she understood. This was not just a hatching. This was a homecoming. Sora looked at her across the chamber. The girl was crying again, but the tears were different this time, not relief, not recognition. Joy, the kind that does not need to explain itself. "Merritt," she said, "thank you for not telling me it was the pipes." Merritt wiped her eyes with her apron. She crossed the chamber and pulled out the clean dish towel she had brought. already warmed against her body on the climb down, and she wrapped it around the hatchling the way she had wrapped 100 things in her kitchen, carefully, practically, with the quiet competence of someone who knows that the most important work rarely looks important while you are doing it. "You're welcome," she said. "Now it needs to eat. What do newborn dragons eat?" Sora laughed. A real laugh, open, sudden, breaking free from whatever place it had been stored for however long this girl had gone without laughing, and the sound of it bounced off the carved walls and joined the humming and became part of the chamber's song, human and draconic, and something in between that was neither and both. "I have absolutely no idea," Sora said, "but I think we'll figure it out." They figured it out. The hatchling, which Sora named Varus, a word that came to her the same way Sora had once described the eggs' names coming, fully formed, already true, needing only to be spoken, ate a paste of mashed fish and warm water that Marit prepared in the kitchen, delivered on a saucer, consumed with the frantic enthusiasm of a creature that had spent its entire existence inside a shell and had opinions about the experience. Varus grew measurably each day. By the third morning, it was the size of a small terrier, its scales brightening from birth dull to vivid green gold, its wings drying and beginning to test small flutters that stirred the chamber's warm air. It followed Sora everywhere. When she checked the eggs, it perched on the platform and watched. When she hummed to the sovereign egg in the far wall, Varus pressed against the stone beside her and added a high, thin note that wove through Sora's deeper tone like a thread through cloth. When Sora climbed up to the kitchen for meals, Varus climbed with her, its claws clicking on the passage stone, and sat beneath the counter while Sora ate, and studied the commissary kitchen with the frank, assessing curiosity of a creature cataloging a new world. The other children at the outpost noticed. They could not have failed to. A dragon hatchling is not a subtle presence, and Varus had the particular lack of discretion common to all young things that have not yet learned what they are supposed to hide. Sora walked through the commissary with a dragon on her shoulder and her wings visible and her chin up, and the geometry of indifference that had defined her first 3 months shifted. Not into warmth, not yet, but into attention. The kind of attention that is the first step away from being invisible. Marit watched it happen from behind her counter, and the watching felt like witnessing a season turn. Thessaly returned the following week with a delegation. 3 vain wardens in matching dark gold mantles and the regional matriarch herself, an ancient dragon whose scales were the color of deep bronze and whose eyes held the accumulated patience of 8 centuries. The matriarch was enormous. She did not descend into the chamber, could not have fit through the passage, but she lowered her great head to the access panel and extended her perception through the stone, her scales flaring gold, her resonance joining the chamber's hum and amplifying it until the entire commissary kitchen vibrated and every pot on its hook rang like a bell. Then she withdrew and waited in the outpost yard, in the bright midday sun, while Thessaly brought Sora to her. The girl stood in the sunlight with the week-old hatchling on her shoulder, its tail wrapped around her arm, its gold eyes bright and alert. Her wings were open, catching the light, and the scales along her jaw and hands were luminous. She did not hunch. She did not look away. She stood before a creature the size of a building, and she did not step back, because she had spent 2 weeks in a chamber beneath the earth, learning that the thing she had feared about herself was the thing that was most needed. The matriarch lowered her head until her great eye was level with Sora's face. "Vayleth," the matriarch said, and the word vibrated through the ground, through the building, through Marit's boots where she stood in the kitchen doorway with her apron and her lantern. "Vain listener, we looked for you for 200 years. "I was in the lunch line," Sora said. The matriarch's great eye blinked once, slowly. A sound came from her, deep, resonant, layered with harmonics that made the air hum, and Marit realized, with a loosening in her chest that felt like setting down something she had been carrying for a very long time, that the ancient dragon was laughing. "Yes," the matriarch said, "you were, and someone had the wisdom to put down her ladle and follow you into the dark. She looked at Marit. The great eye held the same expression Thessaly's had in the chamber, not warmth, but recognition, the kind that sees what was done and understands what it cost and does not need it explained. Marit did not bow. She did not know the protocol. She stood in her kitchen doorway with dish soap on her hands and the morning's menu still chalked on the board behind her, and she met the ancient eye, and she said the only thing that was true. She was hungry, I fed her. The matriarch inclined her head. The motion was ancient, deliberate, and carried a weight that made the air itself feel still. That, she said, is how it always begins. The Vane Wardens established a permanent station beneath the commissary within the month. The chamber was cleaned, catalogued, outfitted with proper incubation equipment, thermal regulators, resonance monitors, humidity controls that did what Marit's dish towels and heat pads had done, only with precision instruments and centuries of accumulated knowledge. Sora was enrolled in the Vane Warden apprenticeship, the youngest candidate in living memory, and she moved from the settlement's general housing to a room adjacent to the chamber access, where she could hear the eggs at all hours and respond to changes in their frequencies without crossing the compound in the dark. Marit kept running the kitchen. She did not become a Vane Warden. She did not learn to read the resonance frequencies or interpret the amber veins or map the sovereign egg's slow, ancient pulse. She did not receive a title or a commission or an apartment adjacent to the chamber. She was a lunch lady, and there were 212 people to feed, and the commissary's supply order was due on Thursday, and the walk-in cooler's compressor was making a noise she did not like. But every evening, after the breakdown was complete and the kitchen was clean and the last warming tray was stacked, she carried a covered plate down the passage to the chamber. Fish, roasted vegetables, bread and butter, the good tea. She set it beside Sora, who was always there, always listening, her scales bright, her notebook open, the hatchling dozing on her shoulder with its tail curled around her neck. "Eat," Marit said. "In a minute, Egg 9 is doing something new." "Egg 9 can wait." Sora ate, the eggs hummed, the hatchling stirred and made a sound like a question. And Marit Tull sat on the warm basalt floor of an ancient dragon nursery beneath her kitchen and thought about the choices that matter, not the grand ones, not the ones that make the histories, but the small ones, the ones made over a commissary counter with a ladle in your hand and a child in front of you who has never been listened to. Put down the ladle, believe the girl, go into the dark. That is how it begins. And for Marit, sitting in the amber glow of a chamber older than memory with a child who was no longer invisible and a song in the stone that she could almost hear, it was more than enough.